Good morning and welcome everyone to our second Focus Cities webinar of the year. My name is Caro Jauregui and I'm with California Walks, and I will be introducing our panelists for today. For those of you who are not familiar with California Walks, we are the statewide voice for pedestrian safety and healthy walkable communities for people of all ages and abilities. We provide technical assistance to create more walkable communities, and we also work at the state level to advance opportunities for active transportation. We are partners with UC Berkeley SafeTrek for our Focus Cities efforts. SafeTrek stands for Safe Transportation Research and Education Center. They are a University of California, Berkeley Research Center affiliated with the Institute of Transportation Studies and the School of Public Health. Their mission is to reduce transportation-related injuries and fatalities through research, education, outreach, and community service. SafeTrek conducts research, provides technical assistance, and workshops to communities across California, educates the transportation safety professionals of tomorrow, and coordinates major transportation safety programs for the state of California. We'd like to also acknowledge the support of the California Office of Traffic Safety, who provided a grant through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for this program. We appreciate their dedicated support for pedestrian and bicycle safety. Before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping reminders. Everyone should be muted, or we encourage you to stay muted. But we will be unmuting some participants during our discussion section. The last 30 minutes or so of this webinar, so please be aware of your mute status on your device. You will note that we have enabled video to promote a conversational atmosphere. Feel free to leave your video off if you desire. If your connection encounters any problems, turning off video may help stabilize it. We will be recording both the webinar audio and chat features, and we will make that recording available afterward. If you do not want to be recorded, please ensure your camera is off and refrain from talking or using the chat feature. After our panelists have presented, we will open up for discussion, during which time you may share your organization or community's experiences if you would like to share. And if you would like to share, please let us know in the chat box. Okay, with that, I'm excited to introduce today's panelists. Our first panelist will be Marianne Aguirre. Marianne was born and raised in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, and was a young mother at the age of 17. Marianne joined People for Mobility Justice, PMJ, in 2014 as a program specialist, and through her involvement, she has developed and led innovative community-based campaigns, bike rides, and programs that center women, people of color, and low-income communities in the public planning process, focusing on bicycle education, street safety, and land use. In 2019, Marianne was appointed as the project director of PMJ and is responsible for overseeing PMJ's finances, contracts, and projects with the support of the PMJ co-board chairs. She has also sat on the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council and was the mayoral appointee for the Bicycle Advisory Committee for the City of LA. Our second panelist is Maria Rubalcaba Gomez. Maria is the Youth and Community Engagement Coordinator at the nonprofit organization KidWorks in Santa Ana. Maria was born and raised in Santa Ana and is a first-generation college student. Her parents immigrated from Jalisco, Mexico. She attended the University of San Diego, and upon graduating, she worked in LA at a housing and tenant rights organization. She then moved back to Santa Ana and joined KidWorks, where she coordinates leadership development activities, the community involvement program, and events for middle school and high school students to learn about their cultural history, social justice movements, and current events that affect their community. And before they speak, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Esther Rivera. Esther was born and raised in California's Central Valley. Social justice and public health are at the core of Esther's beliefs in creating healthy communities. Growing up in the Central Valley, Esther has seen firsthand the impacts of the built environment on small, urban, and rural communities. Working in various sectors such as local government, clinics, and nonprofits has given her a unique understanding of the challenges in advancing the needs of public health and social justice interventions. With CalWalks, Esther works to advance statewide policies and is currently our interim executive director and deputy director. So that's all for our introductions. I'll hand it over to you, Esther.
Thank you, Caro. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I am really excited to hear from Maria and Marianne. So as just the moderator, I'm going to run through just a bit of framing for today, but I really appreciate all of you joining in on this discussion and conversation, and I hope to hear from all of you later on this morning in the discussion, because we really want this to be something that's an active involvement, and we hear from all of our partners who are joining us. So I want to just introduce a little bit more about CalWalks and the work that we've been doing and frame today's discussion. At CalWalks, our vision goes beyond pedestrian advocacy and really goes to the right to exist safely and free of harassment in public spaces. Next slide. So the quote you'll see on your screen here is a part of our vision. So if you haven't visited our website recently, I would really encourage you to do so. We worked for quite a while on framing what our vision really was and where we wanted our organization to move and where we really felt transportation needed to be. So one of the quotes from our vision is, "We cannot move freely when we feel vulnerable and unsafe while walking on our streets, and we cannot live freely when we feel threatened or unwelcome for simply being in public space." Now this was pre-COVID-19, but very much applicable to what's happening right now in the world. And so I think this really frames where we want the conversation to go today and why we wanted to discuss more about this and sort of center the conversation around what communities are facing. So our team actively worked on this vision, and really what we started to think through is, as we try to live through our vision at CalWalks, what are things that we really need to be looking at through the lens of COVID-19, and what do we need to pause and consider with everything that's happening in the world and with our work? So one of the ways we've identified to continue living by our vision is to slow down and think through those impacts. Think through the impacts of the communities that we serve and be sure that we're working intersectionally. We know that people do not see things just through transportation, just through public health, just through food access. These things are interconnected, and sometimes our organizations don't work that same way. And so we really wanted to slow things down and think through how we needed to re-engage and be centering the needs of community. So when we started discussing the challenges with community engagement, which is a huge part of our work, and in transportation, we started thinking through our transportation safety workshops. And we were thinking about what a huge issue this really is. And some of the questions we were thinking through are we providing essential services? How do we continue our work given all the stressors communities are facing? Fear, job loss, food insecurity, rent burden. Where does our work fall along these immediate needs? And how do we continue to advance our vision and mission and advance the needs of community? Our work has centered on equity and ensuring that those who have been left out of conversations are able to participate. What does it mean to our work when these same communities now have an additional huge barrier to overcome with the COVID-19 crisis? We know and understand that low-income communities and communities of color are disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. And we also know that so many issues are interconnected, and the pace at which things are moving and changing creates challenges to track and support the issues and needs on the ground, as well as make connections to transportation impacts. We saw at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, which it's crazy to think it was early March when we kind of started seeing some of these across the state, but we really saw how quickly things moved. And a lot of times we were being very reactive to what we thought this is how we should shift. And what we started to see in the following weeks was a need to really slow down and think through not just how to respond and react, but what really the outcome of our work should be and what we needed to recenter in terms of how we were shifting that work. So for today, we really want to create a space to talk and center the needs of community in order to inform how we can support these same communities and inform changes and shifts our local partners and communities across the state are living. Over the past few weeks, we've been reaching out to local partners that we've been working with to hear more about what they're seeing in their communities, not just around transportation, but in general. We know that we need to keep an ear to the ground, one, to identify ways to support local communities in these uncertain times, and two, to stay close to how community engagement is evolving. We know that so much of our work is centered on community engagement, and that looks very different right now with having to do workshops remotely, with shifting the way that we even communicate and engage. And it's really important for our work to be sure that we're keeping tabs in a sense of how this is working in other sectors in order to help and support communities the best we can in our area of work. So we would love for those of you joining to share more about the challenges and impacts you all are experiencing later in today's discussion. To help you all joining us prepare your thoughts, I'm going to share a little bit more about what we've heard so far from communities and why we feel it's of the utmost importance to talk about challenges communities are facing across sectors. So I'm going to share a few examples of how we've begun to peel back the onion. I don't love that saying, but it's appropriate, and I couldn't think of anything better. But on some of the impacts and the role transportation plays in COVID-19. And what we've heard from communities so far are things like with schools being empty across the state, there's been a shift to more distance learning. But we also know that while school campuses are empty, a lot of schools are functioning as food hubs. Oftentimes these food hubs are drive-through, so families have to have a vehicle. In most instances, they're being asked to make sure children are in the vehicle so they can be counted and be given that many meals. And so what that brings up for us is, what does that mean for families that don't have access to a vehicle, who rely on walking or biking to be able to access those food hubs? And while we know that they are making exceptions in some instances to be able to walk up, there's also just a general concern and fear for being out walking and biking in community as far as what that means for exposure. So again, what does that mean for communities that rely on walking and biking for transportation if they're unable to access these food hubs and emergency food centers? We also know that the way communities move has changed in some instances completely. We have communities throughout the state that were once buzzing with pedestrian and bicycle methods of transportation, and people just walking either to the park or to the market to run an errand. And now these neighborhoods are completely empty on the streets. Businesses are closed, no one's out moving. And so what does that mean in terms of how people are accessing the services that they need? We've also heard a lot about how families are isolated and concerned for how these same neighborhoods that once had children walking, biking at the park, what does that mean for their mental and physical health? And I think that the last two parts I'd like to share before we get more into the discussion is what this means in terms of shifts in transit. So we know that oftentimes communities have relied on transit for transportation, but we also know that in most instances, while transit is being offered free cost, they also have shifted to weekend schedules. What does that mean for communities that rely on transit to be able to access jobs, medical services, or any other services that are needed? Are they now walking and biking because the transit doesn't align with the times that they need? What does that mean in neighborhoods that don't have the infrastructure to support walking and biking? How are these communities navigating and moving? And so these are all things we've been thinking through in terms of what COVID-19 is shifting in terms of travel patterns and what the role of transportation is in connecting to essential services and making sure that transportation isn't an additional barrier to what families are already facing. So I know that was a lot of questions and not a lot of answers, but while we hope to identify some potential next steps forward from all of you and hearing some potential solutions you found or path forward. We also welcome additional questions you all are thinking through to help continue to center the conversation and think through how we really provide a service and continue to advance the needs of communities around transportation. So to continue centering our conversation today, we are so excited to have Marianne and Maria to talk a bit more about what they're seeing in their communities. So again, we'd love to hear from you all who are joining us remotely by phone. And also, please, when we're ready, use the chat feature. You can let us know if you'd like to unmute and actually participate in the discussion, or you can just chat your comment and we'll be sure to share that back. So now I'm going to kick it off to Marianne from People for Mobility Justice. So Marianne, take it away.
Yes, good morning. I'll wait for the slide to come up. So hi everybody. So again, my name is Marianne Aguirre and I'm so thankful to be here to discuss the stories and strategies and how PMJ has been discussing the effects on COVID in our communities and in our work. And hopefully, just like Esther mentioned, start a conversation with you all to see how your local organization or agency is also tackling on these issues. So next slide. So before we get started, I would like to do a land acknowledgement and acknowledge the native people of this place. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, which is occupied Tongva land. Most of PMJ's work takes place in ancestral territories of the Tongva, Tataviam, and Chumash indigenous communities, an area that is now known as Los Angeles County. If you are in Los Angeles right now, I encourage you to take a look at this map. I know it's kind of hard to see. To acknowledge what territory you may be working in. If you would like access to this image, please let me know. Next slide. Okay. Quick introduction. I know I already introduced myself, or I was introduced, but again, my name is Marianne Aguirre, project director at PMJ. I've been a part of PMJ since about 2014 when I first started off as a volunteer specialist. So here's a nice picture of me and my daughter riding our bikes, or my bike. So next slide, please. So as BIPOC, we seed critical consciousness about mobility justice across all communities. We envision a world where people have the freedom and resources to move in public space with love and dignity. PMJ first started in 2008 by handing out free bicycle lights as a public engagement tool. We then began to teach bilingual and culturally relevant bicycle education in low-income communities of color, and specifically at day labor centers. Throughout the years, PMJ has focused on documenting and addressing the transportation needs voiced by LA's communities of color who have been disproportionately impacted by the deaths and injuries caused by traffic violence and the lack of proper infrastructure. However, the majority of the time, those individuals are also at risk for law enforcement harassment, racism, sexism, xenophobia, anti-Blackness while walking and biking. You guys are already at the slide that I wanted to be at. So yeah, I think before I get kind of started, I wanted to take a quick moment of silence during this webinar to acknowledge and pay respects to Ahmaud Arbery. This is something that I think has been weighing really heavily on my heart and my mind this past week. For those of you who aren't aware, Ahmaud Arbery was shot and killed by 2 white men in Georgia back in February while he was jogging. So if we can all take a collective pause during this webinar for about 5 seconds, I think that would be really appreciated. Thank you. So after seeing what happened to Ahmaud, I was filled with so many emotions and thoughts, especially as someone who has so many friends who are avid joggers. So I wanted to ask myself this question, and how does this intersect with mobility justice by someone who was just, by someone who was just jogging in their neighborhood. The way PMJ describes mobility justice is that it calls to the attention to the fact that individuals face different challenges in transportation because the way we are socially controlled in public space, and that manifests itself differently. There's so many intersections between transportation and the other parts of people's lives, such as race, class, legal status, abilities, gender, and so much more, and how oftentimes that typically regulates how we travel and those decisions on how we travel, when we travel, the time of day. So in Ahmaud's case, he committed no crime except that he was running while Black. If people cannot run or walk in public space without the fear of being harassed or even killed, I think we have to ask ourselves this question, is that, do bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure even matter if we're not addressing racial justice as well? Do slow streets and green space serve a purpose if at the end of the day, people are still being killed? I think as transportation advocates, we need to continuously be asking ourselves these questions. We need to do better in ensuring the access to movement, especially for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and even more so, again, for Black folks in public spaces rooted in safety from white supremacy and state violence. I think this must be fundamental in all transportation, city designs, and discussions. So next slide, please. So mobility justice and COVID-19. How does mobility justice and COVID-19 intersect? And thinking about Ahmaud and so many BIPOC folks, walking outside has never necessarily been safe. You know, but I think this is something that this current pandemic is amplifying. Something I want to refer to is the Untokening's reflections on mobility justice and COVID-19 and how perfectly they discussed it. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I encourage you all to just type in the Untokening and their response to COVID-19. But they describe that we are facing unique challenges in our current world. However, something that is not unique is the most marginalized have the least choice to stay at home, work from home, or properly social distance. They are the front lines of our grocery stores, driving our buses, delivering our goods, and more. What has been even more glaring now is all the inequities the most marginalized are facing, such as food insecurities, job losses, lack of access to transportation. And as advocates, we must hold the lives and the lives of the frontline workers from BIPOC communities as sacred rather than sacrificial. If I'm being honest, I think someone like myself who is so privileged, you know, who is so privileged to work from home and even be on this webinar today and have this discussion with you all. I sat with a lot of guilt in the beginning of this pandemic, aside from struggling with my own mental health, as I'm sure many other folks did as well. I felt like I wasn't doing enough. As a transportation advocate whose work has been largely focused on promoting open space, but the public health message was to stay at home, I struggled with navigating that. However, you know, and I think Esther mentioned this as well quickly, as this pandemic, you know, and the occurrences started happening, I think all the inequities for low income and frontline workers were really heightened. And, you know, for many of us, we saw that. Many of the issues around homelessness, police harassment, employment, housing were already pre-COVID, but they just became more exacerbated. As social justice advocates, our role shifted in a way to continuously tackle these issues, but in a different way. And again, just like Esther mentioned, it's, you know, I think some of us we're a little bit reactionary at first, but I think throughout some time, we've been able to sit back and, you know, really take things slow and really want to be intentional with how we continue to do our work, and is our work, and you know, how is our work in transportation? How can we be essential in supporting those with the least? I think we are able to remain. I think the question that I want to ask this group here is, how are we able to remain physically distant but build with one another from afar? I don't necessarily have, excuse me, I don't necessarily have the complete answers to that, but I can provide some examples PMJ has been focusing on and the conversations we've been invited into. And again, I encourage folks at the end of this webinar to do the same and share with what your local organization or agency has been focusing on. So next slide, please. So capacity challenges and importance of collaborations. Currently, PMJ is down to one staff member. Our two beloved staffers, Rio and Jesse, have currently transitioned out into new roles in their lives. And so our capacity in the beginning of this pandemic has been extremely limited. However, something that's resonated with me, and again, reading back on the Untokening's reflections on COVID, is that collectivism is the only way we will survive this moment, which many of us have seen by mutual aid efforts locally, nationally, and internationally. I think something that has been even more significant for us has been the need to collaborate with one another. Next slide, please. So a space that we have been a part of since 2016 has been the Alliance for Community Transit LA, or Community Transit Los Angeles, or ACT LA, which is a coalition made up of local community-based organizations. And one of the campaigns they've been heavily focused on has been advocating for safe and healthy transit. This is a photo they created that showcases what healthy and safe transit is and is not. One of the major issues with transit in Los Angeles is that buses are now running on weekend schedules, and there's a very confusing bus fare policy. I think community members don't know if it's free or if it's not free. And also because of the less bus frequency, this means more individuals on the bus at the same time. You know, and so if low income people and people of color can't rely on bus transit right now due to the changes in schedules and feelings of being unsafe due to this virus, and if they don't have cars, what does that mean? This means that they're less likely to use active transportation because of all this uncertainty. I think something we must ask ourselves is what considerations are city agencies and local community-based organizations making it for folks getting out there, walking and biking out of necessity in a focus city such as LA with high pedestrian and bicycle collisions. Yet these are issues our communities are constantly facing. Next slide, please. So another space PMJ has been involved in with local community-based organizations is to discuss with SCAG the long-range transportation plan. We just had a discussion this past week with the regional board council and discussed recommendations that we felt were most critical for SCAG to adopt as response to COVID. I encourage other folks on this webinar to ask your local agencies for similar recommendations. So some of these recommendations that we made to the council was conducting a regional and local transportation assessment for short and long-term planning decisions. Given the pandemic and the way we move about space, we think it was important for jurisdictions to conduct assessments that identify needs like mapping out active transportation facilities near essential businesses, hospitals, grocery stores, and more. Another recommendation was to expand transportation safety funding opportunities to include environmental justice planning and emergency resilience plans. Prioritize funding investments in environmental justice areas as well as for BIPOC populations, since these are the communities who are often most hit by the impacts of poor air quality, respiratory illnesses, cuts in transit, and now by the COVID exposure. There are long-term and short-term goals with this, but the short-term goal is to provide essential workers, protective equipment, and not cut transit along critical lines. A long-term is set funding aside to prioritize the response to COVID, transportation, and potential future pandemics. Another recommendation has been to bring a more holistic planning approaches in community engagement, thinking how oftentimes so many people are excluded from conversations and knowledge sharing, with certain spaces being virtual and many people not necessarily having the access or education with sometimes how to navigate these virtual spaces. So even with local city council meetings, it's been very difficult in Los Angeles to provide public comment during meetings, but yet still decisions are being made. Lastly, I think inviting CBOs into the economic recovery strategy, ensuring community input is considered in the ways we prioritize and develop economic recovery strategies, whether it's engaging in communities or working groups or ongoing listening sessions. I think one of the main things I wanted to highlight in today's webinar, and specifically in this specific slide, was the discussion on safe streets to essential businesses. I think this is something PMJ right now is currently discussing with an affordable housing development we currently work with in Koreatown that houses formerly houseless folks, and we have a bicycle education component with the residents. And so what we're discussing right now is helping them identify essential businesses that are near their homes that are walking accessible, you know, which includes obviously hospitals and grocery stores, but also maybe smaller street vendors that are in the area, or smaller mom and pop stores, because those are oftentimes a little bit less crowded and, you know, carry essential necessities that these community members need. So next slide, please. So I think something that, you know, I think these are just some of the conversations that we've been having, but there's definitely a lot more, and I can't wait to hear from you all at the end of this, during the conversation time. But some things that I wanted to kind of highlight was that, you know, we must remember all our partners. Remember all those who struggle. Remember all those who struggle to get us where we're at today. Remember that we are talking about real people's lives, and that remember we have the responsibility to our utmost to improve the safety and quality of life of those with the least. I want to close my presentation with those reflections, and have that conversation with you all as advocates on the other side of this. Those of us who are able to choose to be physically immobile must continue to uplift and prioritize those who don't necessarily have that choice. So yeah, thank you all so much for having me be in this conversation. And again, I can't wait to hear from you all and what strategies you all have been focusing on.
Thanks, Marianne. That was great. I definitely would love to hear more about the work PMJ is doing and more of the work that's happening in LA. Just a reminder to everyone, please chat any comments or reactions in the chat box. We will be able to unmute folks, so we can start a queue in there if you'd like to be able to unmute and share a bit more. But before we get to that, I want to welcome Maria from KidWorks in Santa Ana. So Maria, I'm going to kick it over to you to wrap up our presentation.
Thank you, Esther. Hi, everyone. Good morning, or I guess almost afternoon. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit about KidWorks and the work that we do in the community prior to COVID, what we're doing now during COVID, and some of the work that the youth have been doing out in the community and hope to continue to do throughout, hopefully, the rest of this year. Next slide, please. So KidWorks, we really believe to walk with our families. We're a local nonprofit organization here in Central Santa Ana. We are really walking with the families from pre-K through BA. We believe that our students should be life-ready learners and leaders. We do have a state certified preschool program. We have a morning session and an afternoon session, which is really helpful for families who live around the area and don't necessarily have access to nearby schools, and so they're able to just walk across the street and come bring their preschoolers over to our morning or afternoon sessions. We also have an after-school tutoring program from kinder all the way through 12th grade. And so we have 4 community-based centers around the city of Santa Ana. 3 of those 4 centers are actually located in apartment complex units throughout the city of Santa Ana. So it's easy access for students to be able to just walk over next door to where they live and be able to get that help that they may need after school for homework help, or even just printing or access to Wi-Fi, whatever they may be lacking at home. And just creating that space, safe space for them to kind of have somewhere to go, if they can't concentrate at home or whatever that may be, creating that safe corner for them to go there and interact with their friends. We believe in the arts, so we really have programs around teaching students to play instruments. We bring in workshops around painting and just graffiti art and just different parts so that youth can really express themselves around the arts. We have a lot of partnerships with local corporations, local communities, local foundations to expand the networks of our students and just kind of open up different opportunities for them. We have a lot of field trips for them too. During the spring break, we would have been taking them on different college visits to different college campuses around California. But with COVID, we unfortunately had to cancel that. And then summer program, because youth tend to be idle during the summer, and we do see the spike of crime during the summertime. We also have summer programs for the little ones all the way through the older ones. And so we're hoping, we don't know how summer is going to look this year. We're hoping that we can still kind of do something, whether it's virtual, for them to still kind of get outdoors and just get out. Some of our students, even though we live 20 minutes away from the beach, have never even left Santa Ana. So we really believe that getting them outdoors, getting them to explore, getting them to go on hikes, and just get that exposure to the outdoors and the fresh air can really change their mentalities and their emotions, because we are situated in unfortunately an underserved area, an underserved community, and so we want to provide all of these opportunities for our youth. We also have youth leadership programs, both internal and external. So we have student bodies that dictate a little bit about some of the events and activities and trips that they do within KidWorks, and we also have our student body that does work out in the community, which I'll share a little bit about in our next slides. We have our college and career readiness program. So again, we really believe that higher education can be accessible to all of our students, regardless of their backgrounds. And so we walk with them to prepare them to apply to the college process, and with that college application process, which includes SAT prep classes, FAFSA help, personal statements, whatnot, and then we also walk with them once they're already in college to make sure that they're not only getting into college, but that they're actually graduating from college as well. So we really want to encourage that students are actually being life-ready learners and leaders in their communities and in their academics. And then again, it's really back to walking with our families. So we're not only engaging the students, but we're also engaging the parents. So we have several parent programs. We have general parent meetings to inform them about some of the work that their students are doing and some of the activities that are taking on. And then we also have workshops for them around self-care, around money management, around how to help your student throughout the college process. So we really want to make sure that we're engaging the entire family throughout the students' lives. Next slide, please. So the Youth Empowerment Network Program, or YEN for short, is a team of youth leaders dedicated to creating a healthier, safer, and more active Santa Ana. So this program actually was started about 10 years ago. It stems from the California Endowment's Building Healthy Communities initiative. So it's really a space for the youth to become aware of social, political, and economic issues that affect communities of color. Unfortunately, most of Santa Ana looks and is about the same. So most of our families are, low income, first generation, Spanish-speaking immigrant communities. And so we don't know anything else aside from that. And so the first time that a lot of youth kind of become exposed to something different is when they go off to college. That happened to me personally. And so it was just a total culture shock going into college and seeing, that there's people that live a different way than me. And so we really want to try and expose our students to learn about all these different political, societal, and economic issues that affect them and their families. The youth's main goal is to create long-term systemic change within the city and school district to create a positive and lasting impact in their communities. So it's more than just, doing a trash pickup at the beach or doing, feeding the homeless, right? It's really trying to get the students to understand youth organizing and get them to really see themselves as agents of change within their own community. Through their community involvement, civic engagement, and youth organizing campaigns, the youth really start to develop leadership, personal and professional skills that are vital to molding their morals and values. So a lot of youth start to pick up interest in environmental justice, in mobility justice. They start to pick up interests around immigration and LGBTQ issues. And so things that they usually don't talk about at school or with their friends around the lunch table. So it's really a space for them to kind of explore and see like what's going on. They hear these things in the news, they see them on social media, but they don't really have a safe space to kind of talk about it. So it's really creating that space for youth to kind of start developing and start kind of doing critical thinking around issues that are going on in their community. And it's really just a space for them to kind of develop, skills and assets that are going to help them with their academic and career goals as well. We have several youth that, because of their campaign involvement, they've gone on to, to local colleges to study, civil engineering because they did work around GIS mapping and whatnot. We have students that have developed a passion for political science and ethnic studies because they were involved in this kind of work. So it's just really interesting to kind of see students kind of develop themselves and develop their personal and career goals through their involvement with our program. And we mainly are advocating for healthy food access in schools around their neighborhoods and safer streets and alternate modes of transportation, including more green spaces for youth to for recreational activities and spaces. And then so obviously all of these are interconnected and intertwined. And so we want to make sure that not only are they advocating for all these alternative modes of transportation and safer streets, but that they're also being able to connect that with issues around housing, homelessness, rent, immigration, and all these other things that the youth are experiencing at home themselves. And so we want to make sure that they're kind of getting the complete picture of what's going on. Next slide, please. So creating a healthier, safer, and more active community. So youth advocate for safer street infrastructure and open spaces to increase families' levels of activity and alternative modes of transportation. So the youth, some of their past accomplishments actually have been, they did survey collection and GIS mapping of street safety a couple years ago, it was maybe about 5 years ago or so. And they actually got a $2.3 million grant for street improvements and bike lanes. And it's actually really exciting because I live really close to one of the streets that falls under this grant, and so you're actually now finally able to see the fruit of their work. You know, that took them so long and so much effort to do, and so it's really exciting to actually see that those improvements are actually kind of kicking in now. So that's really exciting. And they were also keynote speakers at a National Youth Bike Summit in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 2016, and were recognized as Orange County's 100 most influential students or influential people in 2016 as well. Some of their current work is around safe skates. So they're really pushing to advocate for the awareness and inclusion of skateboarding and active transportation. Usually when we talk about active transportation, we forget about skating and you know, scootering, and that's really the mode of transportation for a lot of our middle school and high school students. You know, they're too young to drive, so they don't have a car, and a lot of them do live in apartment complexes, so they don't have a safe space to store their bikes, right? Because they might get stolen or whatnot, and so, or they just don't have the space. And so, you know, grabbing a skateboard or grabbing a scooter is the easiest mode of transportation for them, aside from walking. And so, we really want to push for the inclusion of the terminology and the words of skating and scootering, and I guess just rolling in general. Within conversations of active transportation, to include, you know, youth efforts around active transportation. The youth also are not advocating for skateboarding not only as a form of transportation, but also as a form of recreation and creating safe spaces for youth to be active and healthy. Oftentimes when we go to parks, we just see, you know, jungle gyms for little kids, and we don't really see basketball courts or space like safe skate spaces for you to be active and so and remain active. And so they usually tend to resort to playing video games, you know, back at home, because there's no safe space for them to kind of be active in the park. And so the youth did various, you know, skate park different design visits to different local skate parks around the area and other surrounding cities. They also did a community survey to see kind of what the community feels like about skateboarding, and they did a skate mapping, GIS mapping of skate hotspots of where we're currently seeing students skate that could be, you know, unsafe for them and dangerous for either pedestrians or other cyclists or even themselves, right? We find them skating in parking lots and parking structures and at schools, and just anything that looks fun and skatable to them, that's where they're going to be. Why? Because they don't have those spaces available to them at the moment. But luckily we have word from the city of Santa Ana that through advocacy and community engagement and, you know, just showing up to those community meetings, the youth were able to advocate for safe skate spaces. And so one little pocket park was built, and there was a skating element included in that park. And then 2 more parks are on their way will be built in the next 2 to 3 years. And so hopefully, you know, in the next 2 years, we'll be able to see that safe space for skating for youth to be active and be healthy in the community. Next slide, please. So COVID-19, it has changed everybody's lives. And so it really has also changed the direction that we've taken KidWorks during this time. So we've really shifted to doing more direct services at the moment. We have partnered up with Second Harvest Food Bank, Bracken's Kitchen, and a neighborhood food pantry that we luckily have next door to us. And so we have been doing food distribution with them for the past, well, since this all started, probably since March. So every Thursday we have a small team of staff that go in and put together care packages and boxes for families to take home. And so our families, you know, as mentioned earlier, families have to drive up and they pick up their food, but we did make sure that we created a separate space for families that live around the area and it was just easier for them to walk over. And so we have a special area for them to kind of come and pick up their food and through a safety manner. We also are doing wellness check-ins with our families. We have more than 300 families active at KidWorks. And so, you know, we split up the calls and we call them every 2 weeks just to see how they're doing. And then we are also checking in with the youth as well, because parents might kind of experience things differently than the youth. And so we're wanting to make sure that the youth are doing well as well. We've also shifted to online virtual tutoring through Zoom. And so a lot of our kids are kind of receiving you know, homework packets, or they're just getting assignments from their teachers, but maybe a lot of teachers aren't necessarily teaching them how to do the work, or they're not even uploading videos or doing live teaching calls. And so we've decided to do an online virtual tutoring through Zoom to kind of help students you know, guide them with whatever homework issue they may be having. And so we're engaging them through Class Dojo and Instagram and putting up challenges of, like, you know, a 10-minute workout and you know, go outside and you know, make a list of all the things that you're grateful for. And so just a way to kind of give them a sense of, like, engagement, and that they're not, you know, on their own through this. And then lastly, we're also connecting them to different resources and support in the community for parents. So we're connecting them to other food banks if they may need it. For college students, we're making sure that they're doing well, that they're able to finish their classes online, and that they're able to concentrate at home. And also obviously the high school students as well, and community members. So we're not only helping our families that are part of our KidWorks programs, but we're also extending our services, which we kind of have already done before, to community members as well. So if any of the community members have any questions or need any help, we're obviously always open and willing to help them as well. Next. And so just to capture some of the youth experiences, you know, many of our families are renters and they do live in crowded apartment complexes and in unsafe neighborhoods. So as it was mentioned earlier, you know, with the mod and all of that, a lot of our families are wanting to go outside and be active and be healthy, but they can't because they are afraid of a drive-by. They're afraid that they might get harassed, or that there's, you know, homeless people in the parks. So even though the parks are there, you're going to see our parks that are empty and with not a lot of people, you know, working out or walking around the area because, you know, they're afraid for their safety. And so how can we create spaces for students and for families to be active and to feel connected? And so, you know, they're feeling overwhelmed with all of these different issues going on. And so the youth right now are trying to focus on capturing their experiences outside of their homes. They want to showcase the not so subtle health, safety, and environmental disparities in the neighborhoods and in the areas that they live. And so we really just want to showcase the active transportation through the lens of youth who walk and bike and skate to, you know, different places such as schools, community centers, park, churches, and whatnot. So yeah, we're trying to just kind of capture. And so I'm excited to kind of see the results. The youth will be capturing these photos and these videos throughout the summertime. So I'm kind of excited to see, like, what it is that they are able to see through their eyes during this time. Next slide. That's all. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Marianne and Maria. We're going to open up the floor for anyone among our participants who would like to share your experience. You can type your comments in the chat box, but you can also request to unmute yourself. so that you can share a bit more with the group. We only have about 9 minutes, so we definitely wanted more time to dive into discussion. So definitely use that chat box, which will record some of that feedback. But also, if you'd like to unmute, please let us know in the chat box so that we can open up the floor for you. While folks decide if they'd like to, I'd love to point everyone to the chat box where there have been quite a few comments around what communities are facing, things like drive-through testing sites not allowing people who are walking or biking, or where there are a walk-up or bike-through test sites, just not having that information that it's even available. And I think that really gets at a lot of what we wanted to talk about today, which was how are we engaging communities, and how is community engagement shifting and changing, not only to inform the work we do and to continue advancing the needs of community around bicycle and pedestrian safety, but what does this mean in terms of cities and how they're engaging with community? Decisions that are being made around shifting budgets, which understandably it's needed right now with special needs of community, but what are the long-term impacts of some of those decisions? What does it mean when funding changes to support safe walking and biking in communities in areas like Los Angeles and Santa Ana, Fresno, Bakersfield, which already have disproportionate rates of bicycle and pedestrian injury and fatalities? What are those long-term impacts of shifting that funding, especially with the strain of how community engagement looks / isn't happening right now, given the COVID-19 crisis? I know other comments in the chat box have centered around from Bema in Fresno around rural communities and the special considerations that those communities need and how it's different than some of the needs in our urban cities. We've also heard a bit more about some farmers markets that allow for riding through with a bicycle, but the other challenge too is navigating streets with fewer cars, but also people feeling a little safer or not feeling a little safer in their vehicles driving faster because of the empty streets. And what does that mean for safety of people walking and biking in communities? So again, if you'd like to join us and chat with us via audio, please let us know in the chat if you'd like to do so. I see another comment from Lindell around let's see, locally when bills are included in development, sidewalks, bike / multi-use paths and bike lanes are consistently built to minimum rather than recommended widths, making their use while maintaining physical distancing impossible. Is now the time to change this practice? I think that's a great point. Another thing that we've heard from partners, because we did circulate a survey, we wanted to share more, but given the time, we'd really like to hear from you all that are participating. But I believe it was our partners at WACA who shared challenges with people experiencing houselessness and what that means in terms of being able to physically distance on sidewalks and public spaces. And so definitely things that we already knew created challenges that we needed to support and address these communities, but also like what does this mean in a time of COVID-19 and how are we addressing and thinking through those things with that lens. And let's see, Beva has shared USDA guidelines allow for parents to pick up meals without children being present. This is due to a waiver by USDA. However, many school districts are not allowing for this new guidance. And that's a great point, which goes back to what we've heard from a lot of school sites where parents are often the ones who don't have access to a vehicle that depend on walking and biking for transportation, are the same families not showing up to pick up those meals. And so how do we continue to support those communities that rely on walking and biking for essential services? And it looks like Lindell has shared that they can bicycle to pick up senior lunches, but the Mercado de Vegetales Gratis is in Placerville much farther. Okay, sorry, I must have misspoke on that one. Sorry about that. Let's see here. Areli would like to chat about information and empowering locals to become local journalists, creating and sharing information to fit the community needs. Areli, would you like to unmute and share a bit more?
Yes, actually, I've actually been talking with one of my best friends who's a professor at Santa Ana College about creating more, like how can we empower people to take care of their own community needs by divulging the information that needs to be shared, be that it via like newsletters, pamphlets, mailers, Facebook, Instagram, whatever like method that community might be able to like reach. Maybe it be community, maybe it's through nonprofits such as KidWorks, where it can be like an after school program or some sort of programs to teach them the just the importance of journalism, the basics of writing, etc. I think that's a method that we haven't really like explored as much, and it doesn't necessarily have to cover COVID, but it's more important now to get correct information out there. As we know, a lot of the people who are a little less technologically savvy tend to share misinformation in such sites. And how do we make sure that that type of stuff isn't happening? Definitely through this type of programming. And Maria, could I send you an email of my friend so that y'all can talk about like possible things? Because I know, Santa Ana doesn't really have any local newspaper anymore.
That sounds, yes, thank you, Adeli, for sharing that. And I think the other piece that brings up in terms of empowering locals to help in sharing information and being a journalist themselves is that who knows best how to communicate and get messaging out to communities than those individuals who live there. And just as Zeva's comment was around rural communities, the needs are different across the state. And so definitely encouraging and getting information locally from partners as well as community members around what is the method of engagement, how has engagement shifted, and how would people like to be engaged in conversations to inform what's happening in communities. I think another comment that I'm seeing in the chat, and again, if you'd like to unmute, let me know. I'd love to chat with you all via audio and not read your comments and hear it straight from the source. But another piece around funding, and I think that that's a big one in terms of how funding is impacted and how funders are maybe still requiring those same deliverables when things look very different. And so how do we continue to elevate what's happening on the ground and what the challenges are for communities in being able to match that, right? And I think what we all agree on is that we don't want to feel like we're being insensitive and pushing these same deliverables when things look very different for community. If we're asking them to engage in a safety workshop and they're worried about rent, how do we really engage community in a meaningful way where they're able to actively participate when they have these other worries in their mind? So definitely thinking through how we continue to elevate the evolving and shifting nature of what's happening right now that none of us, I think, have ever been through. And so definitely continue to message that and continue to push that and talk about how that's changed. And that's one of the big reasons we wanted to have this discussion today, because not enough of that is filtering up in a lot of areas to share those stressors and challenges that communities are facing. I'm going to read one last comment, and then since it's 10:59, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. So it looks like Jenny Weiss shared that she manages a safe routes to school in a rural area. She's worried they won't be able to continue providing education and encouragement programs on safe walking and biking when schools reopen because they won't be considered essential and won't be prioritized. She understands that this is because of the struggles in providing education at this time, but afraid of losing the momentum we've built. And OTS has not allowed us to change our activities either, so the activities have been canceled. So that's definitely a concern in terms of how we're continuing to advance pedestrian and bicycle safety when maybe it's not seen as essential. But what we all know is that these same communities, there's a reason there was support for them from the get-go. There's a need there for education and encouragement. And so how do we continue to elevate the fact that maybe it's not essential in the sense of food, rent, but it is, a connector in terms of how people navigate their communities and how people can get around. And so I think continuing to elevate that and really push that maybe it's not the essential endpoint, but it's definitely a method of delivery and connection that communities still need. And again, when we think about short-term, long-term impacts, what does that mean for these communities to lose these services, right? So I would love to continue talking with you all, but it's 11:01. So if you need to hop off, feel free, but I'll just close this up really quickly. So I definitely want to thank our presenters who joined us today and shared so much about their work. Thank you so much for being on with us, and all of our participants who shared in the chat, as well as unmuted and participated throughout the day. We really appreciate you joining us. And we encourage everyone to take what you've learned today and apply it to your work. Please continue to engage with us and share what you're learning in communities. We'd love to continue lifting that up and sharing challenges, as well as any sort of, I don't want to say solutions, but solutions specific to your community, because we know that'll be different across the state. We will have these slides as well as a link to the recording of the webinar available for you soon, along with contact information for all of the speakers that we had today. Finally, we will host one more Focus Cities webinar this year on June 18th. That webinar will once again feature our partners from WalkSF, who alongside other community members will discuss their work with the Tenderloin Traffic Safety Task Force. So thank you so much for sharing a part of your day. I hope you all take something today that you're able to apply, and look forward to continuing to work with you all. Please continue to engage with us and share what's happening in your communities. So thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.